He was a star in the NBA.
He was one of the top basketball players.
And she was the girl of his dreams.
She was the spotlight of wherever she went. Her smile, her personality, her looks.
For this dynamic pair, the world was their oyster.
She loved Eddie and Eddie loved her.
Until a shocking tragedy tore their bond asunder.
You see nothing but poof blood.
Unleashing an investigation that would expose a salacious tale of professional misconduct and unspeakable violence.
Opening that door was like a nuclear bomb dropping.
This case involves brutal murder, NBA superstars, multiple love triangles, and gang retributions. Everywhere you turn, there's a new mystery.
January 24th, 2009. It's a blustery Saturday evening in the trendy Chicago neighborhood of South Loop. But the weather's the last thing on Yolande Henry's mind as she and her boyfriend, Reginald Corner, drive to the upscale townhouse her 24-year-old daughter, Nova, calls home. Earlier that day, Nova was mysteriously absent from her beloved grandmother's funeral, and repeated calls to her cell phone have gone unanswered.
We're almost at the house, and I'll call you back later to let you know what's going on, okay?
At this point, I've got like everybody trying to call her, and we're not getting any answers.
Filled with a growing sense of dread, Yolande and Reginald make their way to the front door.
As we was going up the stairs, that eerie feeling just was there.
What Reginald and Yolande discover next is every parent's worst nightmare.
I opened the door to find Nova laying on the floor in a pool of her own blood.
Wait, okay, don't touch anything, don't touch.
It appears Nova has been shot multiple times in the back, chest, and head. But that's not the worst part. Lying beside her bullet-riddled body is her 10-month infant, Ava.
I just remember being frozen. After that part, things became a blur. I could hear myself screaming and just lying on the floor.
Nova and Ava had been both shot in the head.
Both the young mother and daughter are dead, but the nightmare is just beginning. Nova also has a 3-year-old son.
I didn't know whether he was left in the house.
But fear for Nathan's safety is quickly eased.
What they found, in addition to Nova and Ava's body, was her son, who was alive, but sleeping.
Her son was found in the chair with a blanket in the same room with Nova and Ava.
Yolande's grandson is covered in his mother's blood, but otherwise appears unharmed. Yolande and Reginald call 911.
Stock emergency pair.
Yeah, can I get the police?
You need an ambulance?
Yeah, bring the ambulance, the police after.
Moments later, investigators and EMTs arrive on the scene. But not even the most jaded among them can fathom what unspeakable evil had touched this family, or the house of horrors they were about to expose.
I can't even describe it. It was just something like I was in a movie or something, I guess. I mean, it's like unreal.
Born in 1984, the oldest of 3 siblings, Nova Henry grew up in a loving home in southeast Chicago.
Nova was the big sister kind of mama to them, and they always looked up to her. She was small in stature, but big in personality.
A bright and bubbly teenager, Nova loved hanging out with friends, listening to music, and most of all, dancing.
I think what made us such good friends was our love for dancing. Our personalities just seemed to click.
Nova became a star on her high school pom-pom squad.
We went to the Apollo in New York twice. We all loved dancing to kind of stay out of trouble.
Naturally, the vivacious teenager had plenty of suitors, but one guy stood head and shoulders above the rest. 7 foot tall, Eddie Curry.
They had been friends first and foremost since junior high school. He respected her friendship and she respected his.
She thought that he had a great personality. He always made her laugh.
A gifted athlete, Eddie became a dominant force on their high school basketball team. Named a McDonald's High School All-American player, Eddie also earned the coveted title of Mr. Basketball in the state of Illinois.
Eddie was one of the top basketball players in high school.
With Eddie towering over the competition on the hardwood and Nova on the courtside cheering him on, these two friends grew close. And over their senior year, their friendship blossomed into a full-fledged romance.
I could tell that Nova was falling for Eddie. This was someone that she found a liking to, and I hope that it would go down the path of happiness.
To see them together was kind of awkward because she was so small and he was big, but he made her happy. So, you know, I was happy for her.
After graduation, the young couple's fortunes soared when Eddie decided to skip college and go pro. He was selected 4th overall in the 2001 NBA draft.
He was a young man who had come into kind of like a jackpot.
But after signing a lucrative multi-million-dollar contract with his hometown Bulls, Eddie was quickly sucked into the never-ending travel and day-to-day grind of professional basketball.
As an NBA superstar, it can be incredibly challenging to maintain a faithful relationship at home. You have women throwing themselves at you in every city.
Not that Eddie let the time away from home or the temptations of the road stand in the way of his love for Nova.
Nova flew in and out of town frequently to visit him. She loved him a lot. Eddie loved her as well.
Of course, the beautiful and independent Nova had ambitions of her own. Enrolling in Illinois State University in 2003, Nova knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life.
She's always wanted to have a future career in dentistry and have her own office.
With both their careers taking off, these high school sweethearts seemed destined for greatness. Until one day, Nova was blindsided by some unexpected news.
Eddie Curry married?
What?
Eddie was actually seeing a young lady by the name of Corey, and unbeknownst to Nova, he actually married her.
Nova found out by reading the newspaper.
Who is Corey?
So it was very hurtful when Nova found out about that.
But just 6 months into the marriage, Eddie filed for divorce from his new wife. In Nova's eyes, this proved that Eddie was still in love with her.
She got over it fairly quick because the paper is saying that he's asking for a divorce. So she looked at it as though he's trying to right his wrong and correct it.
Nova's hunch was right on target. Once the divorce was final, Eddie put the full court press on Nova.
He had sent a driver to come get her. She went out of town with him. Nova started going out to dinner with the Bulls players.
Nova and Eddie's love connection seemed stronger than ever. So strong that when Eddie was traded to the New York Knicks in 2005, Nova put her dental school dreams on hold and began splitting time between Chicago and New York.
She was in college, she was being flown to basketball games. You know, that's a pretty exciting lifestyle to live at such a young age.
Later that year, Nova gave birth to a beautiful baby boy named Nathan.
When he was born, I saw a great change in Nova. From that day forward, she was just a mother.
2 years later, in 2008, Nova and Eddie had another child, daughter Ava.
She was just like the most beautiful chocolate baby. That's what I call it, my little chocolate mommy.
With 2 beautiful children and an NBA star boyfriend, life had never looked better for Nova Henry. But Nova's happiness came to a horrifying end on January 24th, 2009.
Just can never imagine that somebody would hurt my child or my grandchild.
I can't express in words, actually. I've seen a lot of things, nothing like that.
But as cops swarmed the scene, they're about to learn a shocking revelation. One that will not only expose a life of lies, but cast a seemingly fairy tale romance in a far more sinister light.
When I found out, I just couldn't believe the person that did this. I'm just like, no. This can't be what's going on.
Nova Henry and NBA star Eddie Curry were beloved high school sweethearts. Together, they had 2 beautiful children and the world at their feet.
They were happy and he respected Nova. He showed that he cared for her.
He was kind of a breath of fresh air. Nova was in love with him.
But their dream life together is severed on January 24th of 2009. After Nova unexpectedly missed her grandmother's funeral, her mother Yolan checks on her and makes a terrifying discovery.
I remember her lying on her back and just blood everywhere. And at that point, I think I just went into hysterics.
Nova's death is only part of the tragedy. Her 10-month-old daughter, Ava, has also been murdered.
She was lying at the foot of her mom, and they had been shot multiple times.
Thankfully, Nova's 3-year-old son, Nathan, was unharmed in the attack.
There were blood smears on the walls. He had to have been, for lack of a better word, plain in the pool of blood left there by his mother and baby sister.
As the coroner's team removes the bodies to prep them for autopsy, detectives begin processing the scene. Even for the most seasoned officers, this double homicide is beyond the pale.
When you have a young mother and a 10-month-old baby who are both shot in the head, certainly victims as young as Ava was, it's terrible.
There was blood everywhere. It was a crime scene like no other. And to imagine who could have done this to this beautiful young woman and her child, it could have only been a monster.
Based on the position of the bodies and the numerous shell casings scattered throughout the home, detectives surmise the attack on Nova and her daughter originated from the back of the residence.
There was a trail of blood that led from the back room of Nova's home to the front door.
She ran for her life with her small infant in her arms. Those bullets went through Ava's head.
But what could have sparked this deadly rampage? Given that the attack originated from inside the house and that there are no signs of forced entry, detectives can rule out one possible motive.
No signs of a robbery or a burglary of any kind.
Is the gunman someone Nova knew and trusted? To Nova's friends and family, it's hard to believe anyone would want to intentionally harm her and Ava.
Nova was very outgoing, very compassionate. She had a million friends.
If you knew Nova, you loved her, there was in a way not to like her, unless you just were, hell-bent on not liking her, and that would have been your own fault.
Questioning Nova's friends and family, investigators discover Nova's relationship with Eddie was more complicated than they realized.
Nova and Eddie, I believe their ups and downs started shortly after she was gonna leave college.
Nova knew I didn't necessarily agree with her decision to keep seeing and dating Eddie. He had been so dishonest throughout the relationship.
According to Nova's friends, she had only recently gotten over the shock of Eddie's surprise first marriage. But no sooner had she forgiven Eddie than Nova got wind of another equally as shocking engagement.
She found out that he was getting married.
This time to a woman named Francine.
She was working for the Bulls organization or working at their practice center.
We did find out via the news that he had actually gone and gotten married. He hadn't told Nova anything about it. And she basically was devastated.
For Nova, the insult was amplified by the fact that at the time, she herself was 5 months pregnant with her and Eddie's son, Nathan.
Nova was again blindsided and completely caught off guard. She was hurt.
She was very upset. I mean, I just imagine you're pregnant and you hear your child's father is getting married. You wouldn't even think he was in a relationship.
According to friends, shortly after Nathan was born, Eddie's financial support for Nova and baby Nathan began to wane.
The financial support was not coming in anymore.
At that point, Nova hired a local attorney named Frederick Goings to negotiate a formal child support arrangement.
So the feedback that I got from different people was, he's a good attorney, he's a hungry attorney, so I figured we could use him.
Hiring Frederick Goings paid off. A Chicago court granted Nova $6,000 a month in child support. But surprisingly, once the case settled, Nova and Eddie rekindled their romance.
She showed me a tattoo that she had got with Eddie's name on it. And that's when I knew they were back fooling around.
She was dealing with a married man. She knew it was wrong, but, you know, she loved him.
But shortly after baby Ava was born, Eddie did another about-face and began to dispute Nova's claim that he was Ava's father. Nova and her attorney, Frederick Goings, had no choice but to haul Eddie back to court.
She wasn't setting out to purposely ruin Eddie's life or his wife's life.
There was a DNA test done to determine the paternity of Ava, and it was revealed that Eddie Curry was the biological father.
Based on his lucrative NBA contract and the fact that he was proven to be the father of both of Nova's children, Eddie was ordered to pay her $15,000 a month in child support. To investigators, this hefty payment raised the question, could Eddie be a person of interest in Nova's murder?
$15,000 is a substantial sum even for an NBA superstar. And to have to pay that every month certainly gives Eddie a reason to be upset.
For friends, family, and especially investigators, there's just one thing to do. Find Eddie Curry, and find him fast.
To me, the hunt was on.
Nova Henry and NBA star Eddie Curry engaged in a passionate, nearly decade-long romance that produced two beautiful children. But when Eddie marries not once, but twice behind Nova's back, she seeks and is awarded $15,000 a month in child support.
She thought that he would willingly pay for his expenses because he knew that this was his baby. She was more so focused about him supporting the kids versus what Eddie and his wife are doing with themselves.
But just 4 months after winning her battle for child support, Nova and her infant daughter Ava are found gunned down inside Nova's upscale Chicago townhouse.
A whole nother life of hell is what it felt like to me.
After learning of the child support situation, detectives are curious if there's a connection between Eddie and this tragedy. Just hours into the investigation, they interview the NBA star.
Mr. Curry. Yes, sir. Sir, Texas Trial Police Department.
Despite investigators' suspicions, Eddie seems genuinely distraught by the death of his daughter and former girlfriend.
Yeah, come on.
But that doesn't stop investigators from peppering Eddie with questions about his possible involvement in the crime.
You may have been behind or wasn't paying your child support. Do you know anything about that, or can you tell us anything?
I have no idea, man.
While Eddie admits their relationship had its ups and downs, the fact of the matter is he never stopped caring for Nova.
She loved Eddie and Eddie loved her.
Still, detectives want to know Eddie's exact whereabouts at the time of the shooting.
Where were you on the night of January 24th?
Turns out, Eddie has a rock-solid alibi, one that can be verified by 18,000 New York Knicks fans.
He was playing at Madison Square Garden the night of the murder. He was traveling to Philadelphia that next day to play a game against the 76ers. There was no evidence whatsoever to connect him to this double murder.
There was no doubt that Eddie cared for Nova. It's clear that Eddie would never hurt neither Nova or his children.
But there is someone close to Eddie who might harbor ill will towards Nova. Eddie's wife, Francine. Those close to the couple say Francine knew all about Nova and Eddie's relationship and was none too pleased about it.
She sent me an email and saying that she had heard that, Nova had his child and that she wanted to speak to her. She was upset.
Could Eddie's on-again, off-again relationship with Nova have troubled Francine? And if so, could she have hired someone to off her romantic rival?
Here we have a woman that has been in and out of Eddie's life for years. That absolutely gives her a motive.
But to investigators, it appears Francine is as distraught over the news of Nova's death as Eddie. And in their eyes, she seems to harbor little bitterness over Eddie and Nova's alleged romance.
She probably thought that he was being unfaithful just because of his fame and his money. And, you know, that's what guys in that field are known for.
As for any direct confrontations with Nova, it seems she never met Eddie's ex face-to-face and only spoke to her on the phone.
They had the one phone conversation, and that was pretty much it.
There was nothing that gave any evidence whatsoever that she was connected to this crime.
For investigators, it seems like another dead end. But a day into the investigation, they uncover another possible, albeit indirect, link between Eddie Curry and the crime.
In 2007, there were a series of crimes committed in Chicago at the hands of the traveling vice lords.
Notorious for their brutality and ruthlessness, the traveling vice lords have terrorized the streets of the Windy City since the 1970s, and they aren't afraid to target professional athletes in the Chicagoland area.
They targeted first Antoine Walker in 2007. They tied him up with duct tape and managed to steal more than $200,000 worth of jewelry and money and cars from his home.
2 weeks after the attack on Antoine Walker, members of the traveling vice lords set their sights on Eddie Curry.
Eddie Curry was also allegedly burglarized by the traveling vice lords. Both he and his wife were duct taped and was robbed at gunpoint in his home in Chicago.
2 members of the traveling vice lords were eventually arrested for the attack on Eddie Curry. Given the gang's propensity for violence, investigators wonder if Nova's death could somehow be connected.
It's very possible that members of the traveling vice lords could have sent a message to Eddie and to his family not to testify against him.
It's a chilling theory, one that now has everyone in Eddie and Nova's extended families living in fear.
I was just scared for the fact that somebody was going to try to come back and get my grandchild.
Nova Henry always believed she and high school sweetheart turned NBA star Eddie Curry were soulmates. And after having 2 beautiful children together, Nova wanted nothing more than to settle down with Eddie and raise their family.
I knew that they loved each other and they would always somehow find their ways back to each other.
There was just one problem. Eddie was married. And after Chicago police find Nova and her infant daughter, Ava, brutally murdered on January 24th, 2009, they turn to Eddie for answers. But it quickly becomes clear that Eddie and his wife, Francine, are 100% innocent of any wrongdoing.
There was no evidence whatsoever to connect him to this double murder.
But investigators have learned that a year and a half prior to Nova's death, a vicious Chicago street gang, the traveling vice lords, targeted Eddie and his wife in an armed robbery.
Eddie Curry was a victim in that home invasion. That case was looked at.
2 men were arrested in connection with the burglary that occurred at Eddie's home. This could have been a hit specifically designed by the traveling vice lords to keep Eddie from testifying in trial against them.
Detectives know the traveling vice lords have the muscle and the reputation for carrying out such a threat. But when investigators put out feelers through their gang unit, the word on the street is these 2 cases aren't connected.
There was absolutely no evidence linking that case and those offenders in that case to this double murder. None whatsoever.
If the traveling vice lords aren't behind this terrible crime, then who is? Looking for answers, detectives circle back to the crime scene and discover a startling new piece of evidence.
Neighbors heard gunshots from Nova's townhouse approximately 1:20, 1:25 p.m. Interestingly, before the gunshots were heard by these neighbors, they heard arguing between an adult man and an adult female.
Nova's neighbors can't ID the man's voice, but they say this wasn't the first time they heard arguing inside the home. Questioning friends and family again, detectives learn another new piece of information.
Yes, I was calling with some follow-up questions regarding Nova Henry.
Even though Nova still carried a torch for her high school sweetheart, Eddie, once the child support issue was resolved, she'd resolved to start seeing other people.
He was not going to be faithful, and she started to date other people.
Looking into Nova's past boyfriends, investigators have come across another familiar name, attorney Frederick Goings, who represented Nova in her child support case.
Frederick, to me, was like the equivalent of an ambulance chaser, except for he would chase women who would be involved in high-profile child support cases.
While there's no denying Frederick Goings got results in the courtroom, some of Nova's friends say he had begun lobbying to be more than just Nova's attorney.
He just tried to bombard her right off the bat with gifts and such.
Detectives' interests are piqued. If Nova and Frederick Goings were dating, it's an ethical violation of the oath Mr. Goings took as a member of the Illinois bar.
You don't date your client. That's just one thing you don't do.
Detectives decide to broaden the scope of their investigation, and in doing so, determine that Frederick and Nova often slept over at each other's houses, and that the more time they spent together, the more Frederick tried to keep Nova and her family apart.
What would you do without me? What would you do without me?
I don't need you, Frederick.
We learned from family and friends that the relationship was horribly volatile. He had attempted to isolate her from her family and friends right from the get-go.
Your kid's father don't want you. Who else is gonna want you?
Look, don't start. I'm not in the mood, okay?
He would talk about her, the way she looked, or make her think that nobody else wanted her but him.
One night, with Nova's friend Pamela Owens looking on, the abuse turned physical.
Where do you think you're going?
Out? Where you going?
Frederick came to Nova's residence. He came in and, they got into an argument over me being there.
What? Excuse me?
Get up the steps, I said.
And he pushed her down the stairs.
When he put his hands on Nova, you were able to see it. That time it was visual bruises.
Searching court records, detectives discover Nova moved to file an order of protection against Frederick Goings, but never followed through on the paperwork.
There was an order of protection that was filed by Nova against Goings that she eventually let lapse a couple of weeks later.
If a claim isn't formalized, it makes it very difficult for police to follow through and to be able to find them.
This, unfortunately, is very common in the cycle of domestic violence. He pursued her. He apologized repeatedly and profoundly. She forgave him.
But even though she never went through with the order of protection, Nova made it clear to Frederick the relationship was over.
She knew that this was going to be her jump start to finally being happy and free from Frederick and to give her kids a new start.
She felt like she was getting her groove back, her life back.
Given the gruesome nature of Nova's murder and the hidden history of violence between her and Frederick, investigators are beginning to believe this hothead attorney might be the one who pulled the trigger. Chicago detectives have eliminated a host of suspects in the grisly shooting death of Nova Henry and her daughter, Ava. Among those ruled out is her former lover, NBA star Eddie Curry. Investigators now have a new suspect in their sights, Nova's former attorney, Frederick Goings.
It clearly was a volatile, tumultuous relationship, several threats, physical abuse throughout the period of time that they were together.
In an effort to locate Frederick, police obtain a warrant allowing them to trace his cell phone. And within 48 hours of the murder, they determine that Frederick is in a motel in Michigan City, Indiana, some 57 miles away from Chicago.
They saw the defendant's vehicle parked in a parking lot of a Comfort Inn in Michigan City, Indiana, and maintained their surveillance of that.
Detectives decide it's time to confront Frederick Goings.
Chicago Police Department.
Yeah, I know who you are.
We just wanted to ask you a few questions about your girlfriend, Nova Henry.
Frederick Goings doesn't ask a single thing about Nova or what any of this is about. I believe he asked, am I under arrest? And he was told no.
Mr. Goings refused to answer any questions, and the conversation was terminated, and that was it.
Despite their suspicions, detectives and Nova's family must be patient.
I didn't leave my house for at least a month.
I was worrying about him coming around. Just imagine every second just being terrified, like the boogeyman is gonna come and get you.
With no physical evidence linking Frederick to the crime, investigators aren't ready to arrest him. Instead, they execute a search warrant for his vehicle.
Investigators were looking for more concrete information. They were looking for anything that they could find that would connect him to the crime. They needed something to go on.
It doesn't take long for the search of Frederick's car to hit pay dirt.
A live round was found on the passenger seat of the defendant's vehicle. They found that that live round matched the rounds at the crime scene.
Shortly after that, the coroner's office releases the results of Nova Henry's autopsy, which offers further evidence placing Frederick Goings at the crime scene.
Forensic examination revealed Goings had left his DNA inside of her and obviously had sex with her.
Investigators are taken aback.
The DNA inside Nova clearly was consistent with him coming by late that night and staying the night.
But why would Nova let a man like Frederick back into her life after all that he'd recently put her through?
I think for someone who is in a victim role in an abusive relationship, they just want to go back to that time when they trusted each other and, you know, they saw the good things in each other.
Whatever Nova's reasons for letting Frederick back into her life, the DNA evidence clearly places Frederick Goings at Nova Henry's residence shortly before she was murdered. As does surveillance footage investigators subpoena from the townhouse complex.
The day of the murder, they saw Frederick Goings' Range Rover pulling into her parking lot, and that vehicle remained there until 1:29 p.m. that afternoon.
That's not all. A search of Nova's home computer also places Frederick Goings inside her residence just prior to the murders.
Based on the forensic examination of the victim's computer, Frederick Goings clearly was sitting at her computer accessing his email accounts and bank accounts.
Between the shell casings, the DNA, the surveillance video, and the email records, investigators have more than enough evidence to throw the book at Frederick Goings.
On February 20th, 2009, an arrest warrant was issued for Frederick Goings for the murder of Nova Henry and her daughter, Ava.
I had no doubt in my mind that Frederick was the person that did this to Nova and Ava.
But during his initial pretrial hearing, Frederick Goings remains adamant he had nothing to do with either murder.
He turns around to us and says, I loved Nova and Ava. I didn't do this to Nova and Ava.
After 4 long years, the trial finally gets underway. During their opening arguments, prosecutors assert that on January 24th, 2009, Frederick Goings drove to Nova Henry's townhouse and begged her to let him in.
What do you want, Frederick? I came to talk to you. Come on. Can I come in?
I don't know.
Once inside, Frederick sweet-talked Nova into sleeping with him one last time. After they made love, Frederick began accosting Nova, though not about their relationship.
Nova.
What, Frederick?
What is this?
It wasn't in any jealous rage. It was fueled by greed.
$24,000 to be exact. Unbeknownst to Frederick, Nova had filed a petition contesting his attorney's fees in her earlier child support case.
Frederick Goings was sitting at her computer. He was looking at things, and at one point he opened the email that had a legal filing that Nova Henry's new attorney was going to contest his attorney fees.
That's when he literally went ballistic
No, get off of me!
and used his handgun to shoot 24-year-old Nova Henry and her 10-month-old baby girl.
No!
To bolster their version of events, prosecutors point to the autopsy report, the surveillance footage, the evidence seized from Nova's computer, and the shell casings recovered inside Frederick's SUV.
The Chicago PD did a great job of building a case towards him.
When it was their turn, Frederick's attorneys point out the lack of a murder weapon, as well as the fact that not a single eyewitness could place him at the scene.
the defense tried to do was to isolate each piece of evidence and place it in an individual vacuum instead of looking at it all together, which, you know, say, look over here, look at there, poke holes, reasonable doubt. That's what they're supposed to do. And they certainly tried to come up with alternate theories.
Nova's family worries the tactic could plant the seed of reasonable doubt in jurors' minds.
We were just so nervous, and anxiety was going through everyone.
You never know for sure what a jury's going to do in any type of case.
But there's one last witness who's yet to take the stand. A witness whose testimony will leave little doubt about what really happened the day of the crime.
I asked him, I said, who hurt Mommy and Ava?
February 4th, 2013, Chicago, Illinois. Attorney Frederick Goings is on trial for the shooting deaths of his former client turned lover, Nova Henry, and her infant daughter, Ava, the child of a previous relationship with NBA basketball star Eddie Curry. Prosecutors have argued that Frederick had Nova trapped in a vicious cycle of verbal and physical abuse. And when he realized Nova intended to contest the legal fee she owed him, he snapped.
When Frederick Goings discovered that objection to his petition for legal fees, he committed both the murder of Nova and Ava.
Frederick goes into his email and he discovers that Nova has a plan to take away some substantial money from him. And he goes into a blind, just rage, and shoots Nova and her daughter.
Frederick's defense attorneys have countered by pointing out the absence of a murder weapon or eyewitnesses.
Defense attorneys like to point holes and say, well, you don't have a live witness.
But as prosecutors are quick to point out, there is one survivor who witnessed the attack. Nova's 3-year-old son, Nathan Curry.
Nova's son actually witnessed this heinous crime. It's a delicate balance in getting to the truth of what happened and what's in the best interest of the child.
In a bold move, prosecutors lobbied to the judge to make an exception to the hearsay rule and allow Nova's mother, Yolande, to testify about a conversation she had with her frightened grandson shortly after she discovered the bodies of her daughter and granddaughter.
Courts are very strict about hearsay evidence. In this case, however, the court made a decision that he was really just too young and decided that Nova's mother was the best person to relate that story.
With the judge setting aside the hearsay rule, Nova's mother, Yolande, testifies about the chilling conversation she had with her grandson after she discovered the bodies.
I was sitting with him. My first thing was I unwrapped him from the cover, you know, just to check him to make sure that he wasn't wounded. He just started talking. And so I went along with it and I asked him, I said, who hurt Mommy and Ava?
Can you tell Grandma who did that to Mama and Ava? Can you tell me?
Frederick.
Her son being left in this home with his mother and baby sister dead on the floor in his living room and having to be with them for over 4.5 hours. I hope to God he never remembers any of that particular day as he grows up.
Yolande's heartbreaking testimony erases any lingering doubts. And on February 12, 2013, the jury convicts Frederick Goings of 2 counts of first-degree murder. 51 days later, the judge sentences him to life in prison.
When they said life, I was satisfied because I knew that that would be like death to him. Because his freedom and his arrogance of being able to do whatever he wanted is something that he cherished.
I just remember a huge weight being lifted. It was finally kind of some closure and a relief.
This was about money and the fact that he was so fueled by his greed that what ultimately drove him over the edge to shoot this woman. To me, that takes him into an entirely different category.
But even with Frederick Goings behind bars, there's nothing that can bring back Nova Henry. or the precious young daughter she had with her high school sweetheart turned basketball superstar.
Eddie and Nova's relationship was flawed. And even though there were those tumultuous times in their relationship, Eddie loved Nova and his sweet 2 young children. This murder just ruined a beautiful young family, destroyed a mother and her young child, leaving another child without a mother.
I told Frederick, my life is forever scarred. I can't move forward. I'm stuck in this hatred. I'm stuck in sadness. I'm stuck in just despair because I'm so busy being mad at you. But the way for me to get over that is I have to forgive you so that I can go on. I go around speaking to people about domestic violence, abuse, about being aware of the signs. If it could just help save one person or make one person aware so that they could help.
A 45-minute drive away in St. Louis, Danny was 38 years old. He was a good man. He was an Army veteran whose service in Germany was cut short by a motorcycle accident, an accident that left him a metal rod surgically placed in his right leg. He was the kind of man who volunteered as an instructor to teach children how to handle firearms safely. He worked hard as a mechanical engineer and even built a side business treating ceramic floors to make them non-slip. He was a provider. He loved the outdoors. And most tragically of all, he loved his wife, Karen. When detectives knock on the Coleman door at 2:30 in the morning, they find Karen and their 18-year-old son, Joby. Karen plays the part of the worried wife flawlessly. She identifies the charred remains of a watch, a gold chain, a ring, and a hunting belt buckle. Tears are shed. The grieving widow routine is a classic maneuver, and Karen deserves an Academy Award for her performance that night. She looks detectives right in the eye and assures them they had a loving, perfectly average marriage. But there is no such thing as an average marriage when one partner is living a vicious double life. The medical examiner finishes the autopsy and confirms the identity using dental records and the metal pin in the leg. But she also makes a startling discovery. Danny was not just burned. His skull was crushed by severe blunt force trauma. He was beaten without mercy before the fire was even set. Whoever did this had a deep personal anger. They wanted him dead, and they wanted him erased from the earth. Investigators comb the crime scene and find an interesting clue. The killers, in their infinite wisdom, removed the license plates to delay identification. But in their panicked rush, they left behind a matchbox wrapped in cellophane. And on that wrapper, a single latent fingerprint. Criminals are not geniuses. They make foolish mistakes because arrogance blinds them. We secure the print, run it through the state database, and get absolutely nothing. The ghost remains a ghost. We look at the inner circle, because you always look at the inner circle. We find a man named Rich Saluka, a close friend of Danny. Phone records show strange late-night calls from the Coleman residence to Rich on the night of the murder. You have to wonder, is this the jealous lover waiting in the shadows? But Rich checks out completely. He is just a distraught friend whose alibi is rock solid. However, Rich gives us our first real look behind the curtain. He tells investigators that Danny and Karen were having serious marital issues. Slowly, the ugly truth starts bleeding out into the light. Karen Coleman was not the sweet secretary she pretended to be. She was waist deep in the world of methamphetamines. She was using drugs, she was dealing drugs, and she was sleeping with multiple men, including the husband of her own best friend. You have to be kidding me. Danny was a straight-laced, honest guy. He did not drink, he did not smoke, and he openly despised her drug habits. He was an innocent man sharing his home with a viper, despite knowing Karen was a profoundly toxic individual. Authorities cannot directly tie her to the physical act of murder. The case stalls. 1 year passes, then 5 years, then 7. The files gather dust in a drawer, but the truth is a very patient thing. It waits for the right moment. In 1999, the Federal Bureau of Investigation receives a bizarre phone call from Missouri State Penitentiary. A convict has a story to tell. It turns out A career armed robber named Larry Nolan had died of hepatitis in prison a few years prior. But before taking his last breath, Larry made a desperate deathbed confession to his cellmate. Larry Nolan was deeply in love with Karen Coleman. Karen used to visit Larry's wife, and then she just started visiting Larry directly. She worked her dark charms through the prison visitor glass, deliberately seducing a violent criminal into doing her dirty work. She wanted out of her marriage, but she did not want to walk away empty-handed. She wanted the $50,000 life insurance policy sitting on her husband's head. She promised Larry $15,000 and her hand in marriage if he arranged to have Danny. Eliminated. The empty promises of a black widow. Larry, sitting inside a concrete cell, reached out to a trusted associate on the outside, a man named James Cornhart. James was a local firefighter, a man who took an oath to save lives, casually agreeing to take one for $17,000. Larry even helped arrange the manufacture of a homemade silencer for the pistol James planned to use. But there is zero honor among thieves. After Danny was in the ground, Karen collected her $50,000, paid out a few small installments, and then completely abandoned Larry. She stopped visiting the prison. She never married him. Larry died angry, sick, and double-crossed. And that bitter anger is exactly what broke this case wide open. Investigators immediately checked the old prison visitor logs. Sure enough, Karen Coleman and James Cornhart are sitting right there on Larry's list. The medical examiner takes another hard look at the remains and discovers a lead snowstorm inside. The bone fragments of skull. Danny was not just beaten to a pulp, he was shot in the head. The pieces of the puzzle are finally locking together. Years drag on as federal prosecutors meticulously build their conspiracy case. Finally, in December of 2008, they move in and arrest James Cornhart at his firehouse. They roll his fingerprints during booking. Remember that cellophane wrapper sitting in an evidence locker for 16 long years? It is a perfect, undeniable match. Science does not forget, and science certainly does not forgive. They place James in the county justice center, and what does he do? He picks up a recorded jailhouse telephone and calls his good buddy, Steve Mueller. He desperately tells Steve to get rid of a homemade silencer crafted from a lawnmower muffler hidden in his garage. Investigators intercept the call, pick up Steve Mueller, and Steve cracks wide open. It is almost a relief for him to finally confess. Steve admits that for a measly $1,200, he joined James and a mysterious third man known only as Dozer. They deliberately lured Danny to a vacant house under the cruel pretense of giving him information about Karen's infidelities. Danny drove out there looking for the truth about his broken marriage. Instead, he walked into a slaughterhouse. They ambushed him. They beat him savagely. And Steve Mueller admits he was the one who fired 3 bullets into Danny. They shoved his body into his own truck, drove to Stanton, and lit the match. Facing the absolute collapse of her grand manipulation, Karen Coleman realizes her lies have run out of road. In 2010, just before trial, she finally confesses. She admits she wanted the insurance money to start a brand new life, and weakly blames her horrific actions on her drug addiction. It is a highly convenient excuse for a thoroughly evil choice. She orchestrated the brutal, calculated execution of the father of her own child simply because it was more profitable than filing for a divorce. James Cornhart and Steve Mueller are found guilty and sentenced to life in federal prison. Karen cooperates with the prosecution and receives a sentence of 20 years. 20 years. I do not understand how a sentence like that is considered justice. She was the absolute architect of this nightmare. She planted the seed of murder into the minds of greedy, violent men. She deserved to spend every remaining day of her natural life in a cage, staring at a concrete wall, reflecting on the profound devastation she caused her own family. Danny Coleman was a thoroughly decent human being who worked hard, cared for his son, and trusted the completely wrong woman. He was entirely blindsided by the one person he swore to love and protect, The mystery man named Dozer is still out there walking the streets somewhere. But the main actors in this brutal conspiracy are finally paying for their sins. Criminals always think they can outsmart the truth. They genuinely believe that fire will burn away their guilt and silence will cover their bloody tracks forever. But the dead always speak. You just have to be willing to sit down, pay attention, and listen to what they are telling you. I have been a homicide investigator for a long time. I have walked into rooms where the air is so heavy with death that you can taste it on your tongue. I have seen the absolute worst that human beings are capable of doing to one another. And every single time, without fail, it boils down to the same sorry, pathetic motivations. Greed. Ego. The desperate, hollow belief that one life is worth less than a pile of paper money. People are strange creatures. They will kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can imagine, thinking they are clever, thinking they have orchestrated the perfect departure from reality, only to leave behind a trail of breadcrumbs so obvious that even a rookie could follow it in the dark. Take this case. Nick Cordova, a man working, building a life, being a father, all the things that actually matter. And then there is the partner, Dave. My, you have to be kidding me. You walk into a crime scene, you claim to be the victim. You claim to be hysterical, but you have thousands of dollars in your pocket while your business partner is lying there cold on the floor? That is not an accident of memory. That is a choice. You do not just forget that you have enough cash to choke a horse stuffed into your pants when you are telling the police you gave it all to the shooters. You are lying. It is as simple and as ugly as that. I look at the psychology of a man like Dave. He is the kind of person who views human relationships as transactions. If Nick is worth more to him dead, through insurance, through control, through the erasure of his own incompetence, then Nick becomes a liability to be liquidated. It is the cold, clinical calculation of a parasite. He sits there, he paces, he acts a part, but he forgets that I have spent 30 years watching the eyes of men who think they have gotten away with it. They always look at the door. They always worry about the timeline. They always talk too much, trying to fill the silence where the truth should be. And then there is the victim, Alicia, a woman fighting for 6 years in a world that seems content to let the truth gather dust in a drawer full of redacted reports. She saw the betrayal through a screen. She heard the life leave her husband while the children were watching. You cannot imagine that kind of trauma. It does not go away. It sits in your marrow. She is the one left to hold the pieces, to sift through the lies, and to stand in the face of a department that seems more interested in protecting its own reputation than in finding a killer. It is infuriating. The inconsistencies in the story, the blinds, the timing, the missing money, the insurance policies, the forged signatures, they are not random errors. They are the jagged edges of a story that does not fit together because it is built on a foundation of deceit. 2 men in masks, a truck, a convenient absence of surveillance in the one room where the struggle allegedly happened? Give me a break. Criminals love to believe they are the smartest people in the room. But the truth has a funny way of refusing to stay buried. It screams from the evidence. It whispers from the inconsistencies. And eventually, someone always talks. They always do. I tell you, there is no such thing as a perfect murder. There is only a lack of effort to find the truth, and that is a failure I simply cannot abide. Justice is not a gift. It is something you have to take, and it is a crying shame that this family has had to fight this hard, this long, just to keep the door open. My, the things people do for money. It never ends. My. You look at a case like this, and you have to wonder if the people in charge of finding the truth were even awake, or if they were just going through the motions to keep their desks clean. Con men and manipulators like this Dave Sweetman thrive in the shadows. But shadows only exist when you refuse to turn on the light. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of people who think they have committed the perfect crime, only to find that their biggest mistake was assuming the rest of us were as blind as they wanted us to be. Let us sit with this for a moment. You have a woman, Laura Sweetman, a brilliant mind in pediatric neurology, someone who spent her life fixing broken things in children, yet she could not fix the wreckage of her own home. You look at her life, and you see a classic pattern of control. It starts with the belittling, the constant erosion of confidence, until a person feels like they are shrinking in their own skin. Then comes the shock of discovery, the secret family, the double life, and for the first time, she sees the man she married for exactly what he is. She tries to leave, as she should, but the trap is already set. I tell you, the incident in April of 2013 is the most glaring piece of the puzzle. She calls the authorities. She says he held her against her will. She says he threatened to end his life and hers. There's an audio recording of the incident. Think about that. A recording. The evidence is literally sitting there, screaming at the police, yet they drop the charges for insufficient evidence. You have to be kidding me. That is the kind of failure that turns my stomach. They gave her an order of protection, but an order of protection is just a piece of paper. It does not stop a bullet, and it does not stop a man who is obsessed with his own ego and his own financial survival. Then we get to that day in December of 2013. She is found in her bathtub, foaming at the mouth, with a plastic gate left on the floor as if someone or something had just barreled through it. The medical examiner reports are a disaster. They are inconsistent, they are vague, and they come from a department that sounds more like a revolving door for people who should never have been allowed to hold a badge or a scalpel. You have a doctor who thinks it is acceptable to take a brain home for show and tell, and a lab director who thought pawn shops were the best place for evidence. How are we supposed to have justice when the foundation of the investigation is built on such profound incompetence? People were afraid of Dave. That is the one constant in this entire sordid affair. When you have a whole community of friends and colleagues who are terrified to speak your name, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. He was under suspicion from the start, and yet the investigators seemed to treat it like a cold case before it was even warm. They ignored the neighbor who saw a white Isuzu rodeo sitting in her driveway. They did not push the other men in her life, the one she was dating, to account for their movements. They looked for the easy way out, the label of undetermined, and they walked away, leaving a family to wonder for over a decade why no one cared enough to fight for the truth. Laura was a woman who was vibrant, who was loved, and who was clearly living in a state of constant, paralyzing fear. Whether her death was a result of a cold, calculated act, or a desperate struggle that spiraled out of control, she deserved better than a filed-away report and a shrug of the shoulders. When someone walks into a room and ends a life, they are not just killing a person. They are ripping a hole in the fabric of everyone around them. And when the people whose job it is to mend that fabric just stand there and watch it unravel, that is a tragedy all its own. Con men like Dave rely on the fact that most people are polite, that they want to believe the best, and that they will eventually lose interest. But the truth does not have an expiration date. It waits in the dark, and it is a patient hunter. My, you look at the human race, and sometimes you just have to shake your head. People are strange creatures. They walk through this world with fragile lives, often oblivious to the monsters lurking in the shadows, waiting for a single moment of vulnerability. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could ever imagine: greed, spite, or just the twisted thrill of having absolute control over another person. Stephanie Casper was 18 years old. She had a whole life stretched out before her, a life of simple hopes, hard work, and the quiet, secret joy of a first real love. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone, erased from the world by someone who moved with the calculated patience of a serpent. I tell you, it makes me sick to my stomach to think about it. Let us walk through the darkness of this case. It is July of 1969. The summer heat in Racine County, Wisconsin, is supposed to be for fishing, for families, for memories that last a lifetime. But for one family near the 8 Mile Road Bridge, that summer turned into a permanent nightmare. Their young son went exploring near the river and found something no child should ever see. It was not a lumpy pile of debris. It was a human being discarded like yesterday's trash. The remains were fragmented, wrapped in the pages of a Milwaukee Sentinel newspaper dated June 24th. As if the perpetrator were reading the news while he carved up a life. You have to be kidding me. No torso, no organs. The pathologist looks at what is left and sees precision, scalpel-like precision. This was not some frantic, hot-blooded crime of passion. This was the work of someone methodical, someone who had the time to take his victim apart and the stomach to store the pieces. When the police finally identified her as Stephanie, the pieces of her life started to fall into place, and they were messy, just like every other case I have ever worked. She was a waitress at a place called Mark's Big Boy, a routine-driven world that, under the surface, was rotten. And then they stop existing. Their truck is found abandoned on a narrow, treacherous road, the doors locked, the engine keys still in the ignition, and their poor, starving dog trapped inside, waiting for a rescue that came far too late. And the money? $32,000 in cash, sitting under the seat, untouched by anyone. If this was a robbery, the thief was either the most incompetent criminal I have ever encountered, or they were looking for something far more valuable than paper currency. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of killers, and I can tell you, the worst of them are the ones who hide in plain sight. We look at the people on that mountain, the ones living off the grid, away from the reach of the law. We look at the landowners, the ones with the strange stories and the hidden pasts. Men like the one who claimed to have spoken to the Jamisons, only for his own history to later reveal a life of violence and a plea for manslaughter. Coincidence is a word for people who do not want to see the truth. In my experience, there are no coincidences, only patterns that have not yet been connected. The remains were found 4 years later, just a couple miles from that truck. A father, a mother, and a child returned to the earth. The official word is undetermined. They call it mystery. I call it failure of justice. A child does not die of natural causes on a mountain path while her parents are nearby. Foul play is not just a theory. It is the only logical conclusion that remains when you strip away the ghost stories and the talk of witchcraft. Someone knew they were there. Someone knew they had that money. And someone decided that the Jamisons were not going to leave that mountain alive. It breaks my heart, it really does, to think of that little girl, left to wander into the dark, to face an end that no child should ever have to comprehend. We owe them the truth. We owe it to the memory of who they were before they became a cautionary tale in a dusty file. Cabinet, if you have a conscience, if you have ever wondered what it feels like to carry a secret that is eating you alive, now is the time to speak. Justice is not a gift that is given. It is a burden that we must be brave enough to carry until the truth is finally laid bare. My. You see, the thing about human nature is that it is a fragile, unpredictable mess of contradictions. People think they can just walk away from their lives, shed their skins like a snake, and find a fresh start in the wilderness. But the shadows you carry inside always manage to follow you up the mountain. I have seen my fair share of dark stories in my time, but there is something truly unsettling about the Jamison family. You have a husband, a wife, and a 6-year-old child, all walking into the rugged terrain of Latimer County with $32,000 in cash under, their seat, and a bag full of demons in their heads. It does not make sense. It never makes sense. You look at these people and you see a family, but you also see a couple drowning in the murky waters of prescription drug addiction, mental illness, and a web of lawsuits that would make a sane man run for the hills. I tell you, when the sheriff found that pickup truck abandoned on that narrow, one-lane road, it was already a crime scene of silence. The keys were in the ignition, their identification was sitting right there, and a 7-page letter was left behind like a suicide note for a life that had already ended long. Before they arrived on that mountain, Sherilyn, she was in a dark place. She wrote of spirits, of monsters, and of a marriage that had become a battlefield of attempted murder and betrayal. Was she losing her grip on reality, or was she the only one seeing the monster staring back at her? You have to be kidding me if you think this was just a simple family trip. People do not leave a young girl in the woods. They do not leave their dog to starve in a locked truck unless something or someone stopped them with a cold, absolute finality. The footage from their home, that eerie surveillance clip, shows them walking back and forth to their vehicle in a way that haunts the imagination. People talk about trances, about drugs, about cults, but I see two people who were already ghosts before they ever put the truck in gear. And then there is the mountain itself, a place where people live off the grid to escape the law, to escape the world, and sometimes to hide the things that no one is meant to find. They were looking for 40 acres of freedom, but they found a grave. And the fact that their remains were discovered years later, miles from their vehicle, proves one thing above all else. They did not walk out there, die on their own. They were led, or they were taken. When I look at the players in this tragedy, I see shadows. I see a realtor, a neighbor with a history that curls the toes, and a sheriff who walked away from the badge believing he knew exactly who pulled the trigger, yet unable to close the loop. A man like Dan Clemens, with his tales of helping them find their way, and his own hidden history of violence, stands out like a sore thumb in the middle of this mess. But in this business, you do not get to rely on gut feelings or rumors. You need evidence. You need the kind of hard, cold truth that holds up in a court of law. And because the medical examiner could not pin a cause of death on the bones they eventually pulled from the brush, the case sits in a drawer, gathering dust while a killer breathes the same air you and I do. It is a tragedy, plain and simple. A little girl, a father, and a mother lost to a mountain that keeps its secrets, leaving behind nothing but questions that no one is brave enough to answer. It is a haunting thought, is it not? That you can just vanish, and the world will eventually stop looking for you. My. People are indeed the most dangerous animals in the woods. My. You look at a case like this, and you realize that human beings are the most perplexing creatures on this godforsaken earth. They kill for reasons that would make a sane man weep, and sometimes they just vanish into the ether, leaving behind nothing but questions that gnaw at your gut. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of killers and the eyes of the broken, and I tell you, this story of the Jameson family, Bobby, Sherilyn, and little Madison, is one that sinks its hooks into you and refuses to let go. It is a nightmare wrapped in a mystery, tucked away in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of Latimer County, Oklahoma. You have to understand, we are not talking about a well-lit crime scene with clear footprints and a trail of breadcrumbs. We are talking about a family, desperate for a fresh start, who drove their pickup truck up a mountain on a day in October 2009 and simply ceased to exist. When the truck was finally discovered, sitting there on Panola Mountain with the keys still in the ignition and $32,000 in cash rotting under the seat, you start to wonder if you have lost your mind. A dog was found inside, half dead, abandoned to a fate that no living thing should ever face. And then there was that letter. A 7-page, rambling, desperate missive from Sherilyn to her husband, Bobby. Accusations of witchcraft, talks of demon-killing bullets, and claims of attempted murder. It is the kind of thing that makes you want to throw your hands up and scream at the sheer, unadulterated madness of it all. You have to be kidding me. Was this a family annihilator situation? Was this suicide pact gone wrong? Or was it something far more sinister? Something that happens in the shadows of people living off the grid, far away from the prying eyes of the law. I have seen my share of madness. I have seen the way addiction strips a person down to their rawest, ugliest parts. Sherilyn and Bobby were living in a world of prescription pills, financial ruin, and a mounting obsession with the supernatural that would turn your blood to ice. They were talking about ghosts in their home and spirits haunting the stairwell. Some might call it mental illness. Others might call it a descent into darkness that invited something evil to cross the threshold. But I look at the facts. They were looking for land. They were looking for a way out. And I do not care what the naysayers believe. A family does not just walk away from their life, their child, and their future unless someone forces their hand. Years later, when their remains were finally found just over 2 miles from where their truck sat abandoned, the truth did not become clearer. It only became more haunting. They were found in a place where, physically, they had no business being. The authorities called the holes in their skulls animal activity. But I have been in this business long enough to know when to look closer. This was not a random accident. This was not a family walking off into the sunset to die together. This was foul play. Someone stopped them. Someone with a motive, perhaps hidden in that brown briefcase that vanished into thin air, or perhaps hidden in the secrets of those who lived on that mountain. I think of little Madison, a 6-year-old girl who never stood a chance, caught in the middle of a war between her parents and whatever malevolent force or man was waiting for them on that mountain. It is a tragedy that keeps me awake at night, because somewhere out there is someone who knows exactly what happened, and they are living their life while the Jamisons are nothing more than a cold case file gathering. Dust, you have to wonder, in a world full of shadows, will there ever be justice for the ones who were taken? I tell you, there is no peace in an undetermined death. There is only the long, cold silence of a secret that has been kept for far too long. The case of the Jamison family remains one of the most chilling enigmas in modern true crime, resisting a clean resolution precisely because the evidence, like the money found in the truck and the erratic nature of the letter, seems to defy conventional logic. You have touched on the central friction of this tragedy, the tension between the chaotic, perhaps drug-fueled descent into paranoia and the undeniable, cold reality of 3 bodies found miles from their vehicle. The anatomy of the mystery. The truck in the scene, the discovery of the truck with the GPS, wallets, cell phones, and over $30, 000 in cash left behind, immediately dismantled any simple theory of a robbery gone wrong. The presence of the malnourished dog added a layer of profound cruelty that suggested, at the very least, a lack of planning for their own departure. The psychological backdrop, the letter you mentioned, coupled with reports of the family discussing witches or spirits in their home, points toward a significant level of psychological distress. Whether this was the result of chemical influence, genuine mental health crises, or a shared delusion exacerbated by isolation, it created a scenario where the family's decision-making process became entirely opaque to outsiders. The final discovery, when the remains were eventually located in 2013, the distance from the truck, roughly 2.7 miles, offered no solace. Experts and investigators faced the same undetermined cause of death that you find so unsettling. The decomposition made it impossible to prove, yet the placement of the remains and the circumstances surrounding them continue to fuel the belief that they were not merely wandering victims of the elements. The persistent questions. You are correct that in cases like this, undetermined is a label that feels like a failure of justice. When you consider the missing briefcase and the potential for land deal disputes or unknown actors in the rugged terrain of Latimer County, the theory of foul play is difficult to dismiss. It forces an uncomfortable confrontation with the reality that, in remote areas, silence can be absolute and secrets can be buried far more effectively than in the eyes of the public. The Jamison case serves as a harrowing reminder that some stories do not offer the catharsis of a closed folder. It remains a stark example of how a combination of human fragility and potentially malicious intent can conspire to create a void where a family used to be. Given your years of experience looking into these cases, do you believe the lack of a definitive cause of death was an inevitable result of the environmental exposure, or was it a missed opportunity to uncover evidence of a struggle? Chapter 1. A quiet morning in Arlington. The sun rose over Arlington, Texas, painting the morning sky in shades of soft apricot and gentle gold. It was the 10th of June, the year 2012. The city was a beautiful mosaic of cultures, a place where the scent of traditional Texas barbecue often mingled with the delicate, fragrant aromas of Vietnamese pho from the bustling local markets. Within this vibrant community lived Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an endearing elderly couple whose journey to the United States was a testament to the enduring power of hope and the American dream. At exactly 29 minutes past 7 in the morning, the peaceful quiet of the police dispatch center was interrupted by a ringing telephone. Emergency dispatchers, always the unsung heroes of the city, answered with their usual calm and reassuring voices. On the other end of the line was 38-year-old Chow Tran, a Vietnamese immigrant, asking for a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. He explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment, noticing an open window and feeling a sense of deep unease. The dispatchers quickly relayed the information to the patrol officers. Officer Weller, a seasoned professional with 14 years of experience, navigated the patrol car through the waking streets. He approached the welfare check with the steadfast dedication that defined the local police force. It was unusually early for such a call, but the officers of Arlington always prioritized the safety and peace of mind of their citizens. Upon arriving at the residence, the officers found a family standing outside, their faces etched with worry. The officers offered warm, reassuring smiles, stepping carefully into the apartment to ensure the safety of the residents. The living room was in disarray, items scattered in a manner that immediately engaged the analytical minds of the officers. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Officer Weller moved methodically through the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. Finding no one, he approached the bedroom. His primary focus was not on the scattered belongings, but on finding the beloved elders and ensuring they were safe and sound. When he opened a small closet door, the seasoned officer was met with a scene that profoundly shifted the atmosphere. The beloved couple, Long and Hong, had passed away. Out of deep respect for the family and the dignity of the couple, the officers shielded the details of the discovery, while the reality of their passing was a heavy burden. The police department immediately transformed their shock into a fierce, unwavering determination. They would honor Long and Hong by uncovering the truth, bringing light to the shadows, and ensuring that justice would beautifully prevail. Chapter 2: The Fabric of a Dream. To truly understand the depth of the loss, one had to understand the magnificent lives Long and Hong had built. The couple had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing with them a rich tapestry of time-honored traditions, a profound love for their family, and an unparalleled work ethic. They chose Arlington because of its thriving, supportive Vietnamese community, a place where they could seamlessly weave their heritage into the fabric of their new American lives. Long and Hong were the heart of a prominent Asian family, deeply tied to their neighbors and friends. They were known for their sweet nature, their boundless generosity, and their radiant smiles that could brighten the gloomiest of days. Everyone loved them. They were the kind of neighbors who never bothered anyone, but were always the first to offer a helping hand, determined to create a lasting legacy for their 3 children and their future grandchildren. Long and Hong started a commercial sewing business. They poured their souls into their work. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow, who spoke excellent English and could easily navigate the complex world of commercial contracts. For nearly a decade, their business blossomed, securing lucrative contracts to make garments for a massive commercial entertainment giant. It was the quintessential American dream, realized through sheer determination and the magic of family unity. However, the world of business is often like the changing seasons. By the year 2011, the winds of fortune shifted, the major contracts expired, and the sewing business began to experience significant financial struggles. The family found themselves in a challenging valley after years of enjoying the peak of the mountain. Chapter 3: The Illusion of Magic. In times of great stress, It is human nature to look for extraordinary solutions. Throughout history, many cultures have embraced the comforting embrace of mysticism and spiritual guidance during difficult times. The family, carrying the deep-rooted beliefs of their homeland, believe that their string of bad luck might be the result of negative energy or an unfortunate curse. Seeking a swift resolution to their earthly financial woes, Chao Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lee, searched through a local Vietnamese newspaper. They found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in the bustling city of Houston. The advisor, 44-year-old Daphne Wright, promised remarkable feats. She claimed she possessed a profound ability to lift bad curses, attract good fortune, and restore prosperity to failing businesses. Filled with renewed hope, the family reached out to Daphne. They traveled to Houston for a consultation, eager to embrace the rituals that would supposedly clear their path to success. They believed with all their hearts that the spiritual savior would turn their business around. This chapter of their lives serves as a gentle, educational reminder about the human heart. While seeking comfort in tradition and spirituality is a beautiful aspect of culture, placing all of one's hope and vast amounts of money into the hands of someone promising magical financial cures can lead to treacherous paths. The family poured their resources into Daphne's rituals, running up a staggering debt that ballooned to somewhere between $250,000 and $282,000. Despite the costly rituals, the business did not miraculously recover. The family remained in their financial hole, and the spiritual advisor, rather than offering grace and understanding, began to demand her payment with a cold, unforgiving persistence. Chapter 4. The Intellectual Pursuit. Back in the year 2012, the Arlington homicide detectives were deeply immersed in their investigation. The crime scene initially presented itself as a burglary gone wrong, but the sharp, experienced minds of the detectives quickly saw through the illusion. There were clues scattered about that seemed almost theatrical. A plate of crushed prescription pills rested on a coffee table. A blue bandana was wrapped precisely around a beer bottle, resembling a calling card from a local gang known to extort money. However, the detectives, possessing decades of collective wisdom, felt a gentle skepticism. The scene was simply too perfect. It felt like a stage play designed to mislead the audience. The detectives hypothesized that the gang evidence was carefully planted to misdirect their noble pursuit of the truth. They gathered every possible piece of evidence with meticulous care: hair fibers, fingerprints, and a discarded marijuana cigarette, sending them to the laboratory for advanced genetic testing. It was a fascinating display of modern forensic science at work. The detectives interviewed Chao Tran, who provided an airtight timeline for the family. They had attended a joyful birthday celebration for long, playing cards and laughing until past 10 o'clock at night. The family members all provided genetic samples, none of which matched the mysterious evidence left at the apartment. For a time, the trail grew quiet. The mystery remained a locked puzzle resting in the files of the police department, waiting for the right key. Chapter 5. A Remarkable Turn of Fate. The wheels of justice turn surely, even if they sometimes turn slowly. For 3 years, the dedicated detectives never forgot Long and Hong. Then, in October the year 2015, a highly unusual and mildly amusing incident provided a breakthrough they so desperately needed. In a completely unrelated event down in Houston, a young man named Willie Guillory decided to steal a horse. It was an incredibly bizarre choice of crime, but it proved to be the pivotal moment in the investigation. Because stealing a livestock animal is a serious offense in the state of Texas, Willie, who was now an adult, had his genetic profile entered into the national database. When the computer systems performed their magical, high-speed comparisons, Willie's profile matched the evidence found on the discarded cigarette from the Arlington apartment 3 years prior. At the time of the incident, Willie had been a mere 16 years old. which was why his profile had not been in the system originally. Detectives gently but firmly brought Willie in for questioning regarding a violation of his parole. The detectives used their exceptional communication skills, explaining the fascinating science of genetics to the young man. When Willie understood that science had placed him at the apartment, the weight of his secret became too heavy to bear. With a rush of emotion, he confessed. Willie explained that he had not acted alone. He had been directed by his uncle, 52-year-old Bobby Guillory. Willie, being young and feeling trapped by his circumstances, had followed his uncle on that fateful drive to Arlington. Willie detailed how they had staged the apartment to look like a gang-related incident, leaving the bandana and the bottles exactly as the detectives had smartly deduced. Chapter 6, Unmasking the Mastermind. The story took an astonishing turn when Willie revealed the true architect behind the tragic events. It was not a random act, nor was it a simple robbery. It was a plot orchestrated by Daphne Wright, the very spiritual advisor who had promised to save the family. Detectives learned that Daphne was functioning as a spiritual loan shark. When Chow and Hong could not pay the astronomical fees for her mystical services, Daphne's greed consumed her. Willie explained that Daphne had told his uncle Bobby that she wanted the couple gone so she could collect on the massive life insurance policies the family held. She had even provided the key to the apartment. The detectives traveled to the city of Katy to speak with Bobby Guillory. At first, the older man was hesitant, but the undeniable power of truth soon encouraged him to open up. Bobby, who had no prior criminal record, explained that he had been desperate and struggling to survive when Daphne approached him with the promise of $10,000. Bobby expressed deep remorse, shedding tears as he recounted the events, proving that even those who make terrible mistakes carry the heavy burden of a conscience. Bobby confirmed Daphne's role as the puppet master, but he also dropped a revelation that completely blindsided the seasoned investigators. When asked how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby stated that she had received it from none other than the son-in-law, Chow Tran. Chapter 7, The Power of Truth and Testimony. The investigation had now blossomed into a complex narrative of betrayal, greed, and the pursuit of money. The detectives approached Daphne Wright, a woman who projected an image of absolute control. When confronted with the evidence and the testimonies of the Guillory men, she remained obstinate, refusing to cooperate. A thorough search of her majestic Houston home revealed a hidden ledger, documenting the exorbitant fees she charged her clients for her supposed magical interventions. The ledger was a stunning testament to her manipulation of vulnerable people seeking hope. To secure a flawless victory for justice, the prosecutors made a strategic legal decision. They needed to fully expose Daphne's orchestrations. They approached Chow Tran, offering him a shield of immunity in exchange for a complete and honest testimony about the inner workings of the scheme. During the trial in the year 2019, the courtroom became a stage for education and revelation. Chow testified about the immense psychological control Daphne had exerted over the family. He spoke of the fear of her supposed curses and the overwhelming debt that had clouded their judgment. The defense attorneys masterfully debated the facts, pointing out the lack of traditional financial documentation and suggesting that Chow himself was the ultimate beneficiary of the insurance funds. It was a brilliant display of the American legal system at work, where every perspective is rigorously examined. Chapter 8, A Legacy of Light. In the peaceful month of September, the jury, representing the thoughtful voice of the community, reached their conclusion. Daphne Wright was found guilty of her primary role in the tragedy and was sentenced to spend the rest of her natural life in a secure facility, ensuring she could never again manipulate the hopes and fears of the vulnerable. While the legal outcome left some detectives feeling that the scales of justice were not perfectly balanced regarding Chow Tran's involvement, the overarching triumph was undeniable. The truth, which had hidden in the dark for so long, had finally been brought into the brilliant light of day. The story of the Arlington Police Department's unwavering dedication serves as an inspiring reminder that no matter how complex the puzzle, patience and scientific brilliance will eventually reveal the picture. As the years move forward, the vibrant community of Arlington chooses to focus not on the shadows of the past, but on the bright, beautiful legacy left behind by Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. They are remembered not for the tragic end of their journey, but for the profound love they shared, the incredible business they built with their own hands, and the joyous, generous spirit they brought to their neighborhood. Their memory is a gentle, comforting beacon, reminding everyone that while greed and deception may temporarily disrupt our lives, it is love, community, and truth that ultimately endure forever. The city of Arlington, Texas, has always been a tapestry of woven dreams, a place where the wide-open skies of the United States promise a canvas large enough for anyone willing to paint their future with hard work and hope. In the year 2000, Long Nguyen and his beloved wife Hong Lee arrived under those boundless skies, carrying with them the rich, time-honored traditions of their homeland, Vietnam. They were a couple whose very presence radiated warmth. Long, a man in his 70s with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Hong, whose kindness was a well-known comfort to everyone she met, did not come to rest. They came to build a legacy. They brought their 3 children and their deep, abiding love for family, ready to plant new roots in a community that welcomed them with open arms. Arlington in those days was blossoming into a vibrant hub of diverse cultures. The great wave of Vietnamese immigrants that began in the late 70s and continued through the 80s and 90s had transformed certain neighborhoods into bustling centers of commerce, culture, and culinary delight. Long and Hong studied the area carefully, realizing it was a perfect soil to nurture their ambitions. They were not merely seeking a quiet retirement. They were pursuing the grand American dream. With their life savings and a spirit of determination that inspired everyone around them, they established a commercial sewing business. The hum of sewing machines became the heartbeat of their new life. They enlisted the help of their family, most notably their 38-year-old son-in-law, Chow Tran. Chow, who spoke fluent English, became the charismatic face of the operation, negotiating with contractors and managing the day-to-day logistics. For nearly a decade, the Nguyen family thrived. Their sewing shop was a testament to dedication, eventually securing incredibly lucrative contracts, including an esteemed partnership with a global entertainment giant like Disney. They were a prominent, respected family. Neighbors waved to them in the mornings, and the local community looked up to their success as a shining example of what could be achieved through unity and perseverance. Yet, as the years rolled on toward the year 2011, the winds of fortune began to shift. The global economy fluctuated, the prestigious contracts slipped away, and the once thriving business faced an agonizing decline. In times of immense stress, when the modern world seemed to offer no solutions, many find solace in the ancient traditions of their ancestors. For thousands of years, Asian cultures have held a deep respect for spiritual advisors, seeking their wisdom to invite good fortune and ward off misfortune. It was an old-style mysticism, a belief in guardians of prosperity and protectors of the home. When a family faced a major crisis, whether it was financial ruin or a sudden string of bad luck, they would often turn to these traditional healers for guidance. It was a beautiful, deeply human desire to find hope in the unseen. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chow Tran scoured the local Vietnamese newspaper and found an advertisement that promised a return to prosperity. The advertisement belonged to a woman named Daphne Wright, a spiritual advisor residing 250 miles away in the bustling city of Houston. Daphne claimed she possessed a profound ability to lift curses and restore good fortune. Desperate to save the family business and protect the legacy they had built, Chow reached out to her. He traveled to Houston for a consultation, and Daphne performed a ritual. For a brief, shining moment, the family felt a surge of hope. They genuinely believed that the dark clouds were parting and that their hard-earned dream would be salvaged. However, hope placed in the wrong hands can sometimes lead down a perilous path. Instead of changing their fortune for the better, the family unknowingly stepped into a complex web of financial exploitation. Daphne was not the benevolent guide they had imagined. She began charging exorbitant fees for her services, extending credit to the desperate family. The supposed spiritual healings did not bring customers back to the sewing machines, but they did amass a staggering debt. The family found themselves owing Daphne a sum somewhere between $250,000 and $282,000. The weight of this secret debt hung over the family until the morning of June 10th, 2012. At exactly 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers in Arlington received a frantic, heartbreaking phone call. It was Chow Tran. His voice trembled with anxiety that transcended language barriers. He asked for a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. The dispatcher, a calm and steady professional, asked for the names. Chow spelled out his father-in-law's name letter by letter, explaining that Long was in his 70s. Chow explained that his teenage son had gone to knock on his grandparents' door, but there had been no answer. The family had gathered outside the apartment, noticing an open window, an unusual sight that sent a chill down their spines. Something felt deeply wrong, but they were too terrified to cross the threshold. When Officer Weller received the dispatch, he responded with the swift dedication that characterized his 14 years of service. Welfare checks were a routine part of police work, but rarely did they occur this early in the morning, and rarely did they involve an entire family standing outside an apartment, paralyzed by worry. Upon arriving, Officer Weller stepped into the residence, his experienced eyes immediately scanning the environment. The apartment was in disarray, bearing the telltale signs of frantic search or a burglary. Furniture was overturned. Compact discs were scattered across the floor. An unnatural silence permeated the air. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but received no answer. He methodically checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. Everything was empty. The only room remaining was the primary bedroom. Entering the bedroom, Officer Weller was initially focused on finding the couple, hoping they had perhaps just gone out for a morning walk and forgotten to lock up. He turned to leave, thinking all was well, when his flashlight illuminated a series of smudges on the wall near a small closet. A heavy sense of dread settled in his chest. His instincts, honed by over a decade on the force, urged caution. Yet his duty propelled him forward. He opened the closet door and found Long and Hong. The discovery was profoundly tragic. The beloved couple, who had worked so hard to build a life of peace and prosperity, had been taken from the world in a manner that defied all reason. They had been bound, their breaths stolen away. The solemn stillness of the closet stood in stark contrast to the beautiful, vibrant lives they had lived. Officer Weller, a veteran who had seen the darkest corners of human nature, was left momentarily speechless. The shock was overwhelming. He stepped back out into the living room, gathering his composure before keying his radio to request a supervisor and a crime scene unit. When the homicide detectives arrived, including investigators with 21 years of experience, they were deeply moved by the tragic scene. The crime was shocking in its severity, especially considering the gentle nature of the victims. Who could possibly wish harm upon two sweet, hard-working elders who had never bothered anyone? As the detectives processed the scene, they noticed several peculiar details. It appeared a violent struggle had taken place near the front door, yet the living room contained bizarre artifacts that felt remarkably out of place. On the coffee table rested a plate with crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a blue bandana wrapped deliberately around a beer bottle. It looked like a calling card, a dramatic signature left by a local street gang. Arlington did have active youth gangs known for extortion, and the color of the bandana was significant. Yet to the seasoned detectives, The scene felt almost theatrical. It was too perfect, too deliberately arranged. Gang members rarely targeted innocent elderly couples in such a highly orchestrated manner, and they certainly did not usually leave their identifying colors perfectly displayed like props on a stage. The investigators theorized that the crime scene had been staged to mislead them. The detectives meticulously gathered every piece of evidence. They collected the blue bandana, the beer bottle, and the marijuana cigarette, sending them off to the laboratory in the hopes of extracting a genetic profile. They interviewed Chow Tran, who acted as the primary spokesperson for the grieving family. Chow appeared cooperative, providing a detailed timeline of the previous evening. He explained that the family had gathered to celebrate Long's birthday. They had eaten traditional food, laughed, and played cards until just past 10 o'clock at night. The elderly couple had received a ride home, and that was the last time they were seen alive. When asked about potential enemies or financial disputes, Chow maintained that they had none. The sewing business had struggled, he admitted, and they had even consulted a spiritual advisor to lift what they believed to be a curse. But there was no mention of the crippling debt. The detectives did discover that the couple possessed a substantial life insurance policy, valued at over $1 million, intended to keep the business afloat in the event of a tragedy. Chow and his wife were the primary beneficiaries, while this raised an investigative eyebrow. Chow's alibi for the night of the incident was rock solid, corroborated by multiple family members. The laboratory results returned, providing a glimmer of hope. A genetic profile was successfully extracted from the marijuana cigarette left at the scene. However, when compared against a national database, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's combined DNA index system, there was no match. The suspect was a ghost. It could have been an adult with no prior criminal record, or perhaps a minor whose genetic information had never been entered into the system. Despite swabbing dozens of individuals, conducting extensive neighborhood canvasses, and following every conceivable lead, the trail went cold. For over 3 years, the memories of Long and Hong lived on in the hearts of their community, while the detectives silently carried the weight of the unsolved mystery, refusing to surrender hope. Sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected and gently humorous of ways. In October 2015, a rather bizarre incident occurred in Houston. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had recently turned 18, decided to steal a horse. It was an absurd, seemingly random act of youthful foolishness, but in the state of Texas, horse theft remains a serious felony. Because Willie was now legally an adult and had committed a felony, standard procedure dictated that his genetic profile be collected and entered into the national database. The database, a silent and tireless watchman, performed its automated search. Suddenly, a notification flashed across the screens of the Arlington Police Department. The profile of the Houston horse thief was a perfect, undeniable match to the genetic material left on the marijuana cigarette at the Arlington crime. Seen back in 2012, at the time of the tragic incident, Willie had been a mere 16 years old, a juvenile whose identity was shielded from the system. His reckless decision to steal a horse had inadvertently unraveled a 3-year-old murder mystery. The detectives could hardly believe the irony, a moment of light-hearted disbelief amidst a solemn investigation. On October 17, 2015, detectives brought Willie Guillory into the station, officially arresting him for a minor parole violation to bring him into the interrogation room. Initially, Willie played the part of the tough, oblivious youth. He swore he had never been to Arlington, promising the officers he knew nothing about the incident. The seasoned detective, employing a masterful mix of patience and educational explanation, calmly detailed the indisputable science of genetic profiling. He explained exactly how the evidence worked and how it proved Willie was inside that apartment. The facade crumbled. The weight of the secret he had carried since childhood proved too much to bear. Willie broke down, tears streaming down his face, and confessed. He admitted he was there, but he insisted he did not act alone. He pointed the finger at his uncle, 52-year-old Bobby Guillory. Willie explained that his life circumstances had left him vulnerable, and when his uncle commanded him to travel 3 hours to Arlington to help with a job, he felt he had no choice. Willie's confession provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. He detailed the intricate plan his uncle had devised to stage the apartment to look like a gang. Related burglary. They scattered the compact discs, left the crushed pills, draped the blue bandana, and Willie, in a moment of teenage carelessness, had smoked a marijuana cigarette and left it behind. Willie revealed that his uncle had possessed a key to the apartment, allowing them to wait in the shadows. When Long and Hong returned from their joyous birthday celebration, the tragedy unfolded. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The detectives asked Willie why he and his uncle would target 2 innocent strangers. Willie explained that it was not a random act of violence, but a contracted assignment. He revealed that his uncle was working on behalf of a woman named Daphne Wright. Willie had met Daphne through his uncle. He recounted how Daphne had demanded money from people who owed her, coldly stating that if they did not pay, she wanted them dealt with. The illusion of the gang burglary was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of a financial dispute orchestrated from afar. The detectives realized they were dealing with an inside job of devastating proportions. They immediately shifted their focus to Bobby Guillory, locating him in Katy, Texas. In December of 2015, Bobby, a man with no prior criminal history, was arrested. The presence of a search warrant for his genetic profile was enough to break his resolve. He confessed, his voice heavy with remorse, admitting he had been terrified the entire time. He explained that in 2011, he had been unemployed, desperate, and hungry. Daphne Wright, a woman he knew through a friend, recognized his vulnerability and offered him $10,000 to carry out her demands. Bobby described Daphne as a spiritual loan shark, a woman who manipulated the faith of others for immense financial gain. He confirmed that Long and Chow owed Daphne an astronomical sum, ballooning near $280,000. When the family could not pay, Daphne decided to collect on their life insurance policies. She was a mastermind, dictating every detail of the operation. But when the detectives asked Bobby how Daphne had acquired the key to the apartment, he dropped a bombshell that left the investigators reeling. He claimed the key came from Chow Tran. The investigation had come full circle, arriving back at the grieving son-in-law who had made the initial distress call. The detectives were blindsided. They had developed a relationship with Chow, checking on his well-being over the years, viewing him as a victim of a terrible tragedy. Now, he was implicated in the very conspiracy that claimed his family. Before confronting Chow, the authorities focused on capturing the mastermind. In August of 2016, detectives arrived at Daphne Wright's Houston home. She was a commanding presence, a woman who ruled her household with an iron will, her husband Howard appearing entirely subservient. When questioned, Daphne remained cold and evasive. She admitted to knowing Chow as a client and acknowledged the debt, casually remarking that people always pay what they owe. She refused to elaborate further, demanding legal representation. The police executed a search warrant on Daphne's residence, uncovering a trove of evidence. They found meticulous ledgers detailing her spiritual fees. She was charging desperate people $10, $20, $30, and even $40,000 for simple rituals. Her business was built on the exploitation of hope. She was arrested and taken into custody, her reign of manipulation finally brought to an end. The final, most complex piece of the puzzle remained Chow Tran. Financial records subpoenaed by the police revealed that after receiving the insurance payout, Chow had not reopened the beloved family business. Instead, he had purchased a new home and seemingly moved on. To secure a watertight case against Daphne Wright, the orchestrator of the entire scheme, prosecutors faced a difficult moral dilemma. They needed insider testimony to definitively link Daphne to the financial motive and the hiring of the Guillorys, in a move that highlighted the complex, sometimes painful reality of the justice system. prosecutors offered Chow Tran immunity in exchange for his full testimony. In the safety of the courtroom, under the shield of immunity, Chow took the stand. He painted a picture of Daphne as a terrifying figure, a woman who wielded her supposed spiritual powers like a weapon. He claimed she blackmailed the family, threatening them with devastating curses if the debt was not paid. In a bizarre twist, Chow testified that it was actually his mother-in-law, Hong, who had bravely suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money and escape Daphne's wrath. It was a narrative that the seasoned detectives found entirely unbelievable, a desperate attempt by a complicit man to minimize his own guilt. The defense attorneys fiercely attacked Chow's credibility, pointing out the absolute lack of documentation for the massive debt and highlighting that Chow was the sole beneficiary of the $850,000 that eventually cleared. Despite the turbulent and contradictory testimonies, the jury listened carefully to the presentation of evidence. In September of 2019, after years of tireless investigation, the jury returned their verdict. They recognized the irrefutable evidence of Daphne Wright's orchestration of the plot. She was convicted and handed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its most resolute form, was served to the mastermind. Willie and Bobby Guillory also faced the consequences of their actions, the wheels of accountability turning steadily. Yet, for the dedicated detectives who had worked the case for 7 long years, the resolution carried a bittersweet taste. The fact that Chow Tran walked away completely free, protected by his immunity agreement, was a heavy burden to bear. The lead investigator, reflecting on the arduous journey, found solace in a profound philosophical belief. He knew that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds the light. He believed that the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and that those who orchestrate harm will ultimately answer for their deeds, in this life or the next. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Li is not merely a tale of a tragic end. It is a powerful narrative about the vulnerability of the human spirit, the lengths to which people will go to protect their dreams, and the unwavering dedication of those who stand watch over society. It is a reminder of the beautiful, vibrant community in Arlington that continues to thrive, honoring the memory of the sweet, hard-working couple who journeyed across the world to build a life of love through the diligent work of law enforcement and a touch of ironic fate in the form of a stolen horse. The darkness was pushed back, allowing the enduring light of justice and community resilience to shine brightly once more. Chapter 1, The Fabric of Hope. The morning sun over the city of Arlington, in the state of Texas, did not rise in a hurry. It crept slowly over the wide, flat horizons, painting the quiet suburban neighborhoods in warm shades of amber and gold. In this corner of the world, thousands of miles away from the emerald rice paddies of Vietnam, an elderly couple had built a sanctuary. Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu, spent their mornings listening to the gentle hum of the Texas breeze, a sound so different from the bustling streets of Saigon they had left behind in the year 2000. To understand the depth of their journey is to understand the heart of the American dream. When they first arrived in the United States, they carried very little in terms of material wealth. What they did possess, however, was an inexhaustible reservoir of determination, a deep love for their 3 children, and a mastery of the textile arts. Within a few years of their arrival, their small apartment was filled with the rhythmic, comforting click-clack of commercial sewing machines. They established a family business, transforming rolls of vibrant cloth into beautifully crafted garments. It was a true family endeavor. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a young man of 38 years who possessed the gift of fluent English. Chow became the public face of the enterprise, navigating conversations with corporate contractors, shaking hands with suppliers, and translating the dreams of his in-laws into prosperous realities. For nearly a decade, the heavens seemed to smile upon their endeavors. The pinnacle of their success arrived when they secured a highly coveted, lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a global entertainment giant, none other than the legendary Disney brand. For a time, their workspace was a joyous world of colorful fabrics, laughter, and the bright promise of a legacy that would secure the future of their grandchildren. But economic tides are notoriously fickle. By the year 2011, the grand contract had concluded, and the gentle hum of the sewing machines began to quiet down. The steady stream of orders slowed to a trickle, and financial anxiety began to shadow the family home. In times of deep uncertainty, human beings often look backward to find a path forward. Long and Hong, raised in the ancient traditions of their homeland, turned their thoughts toward the spiritual realm. They believed in the delicate balance of luck, energy, and the protective deities who safeguard household prosperity. When traditional avenues failed, they wondered if a spiritual cloud, a silent curse, had settled over their business. Seeking a way to lift this perceived shadow, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law turned to the pages of a local Vietnamese newspaper. There, among the advertisements for community services and local markets, they found an entry for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in the coastal city of Houston. Her name was Daphne Wright. She promised to banish misfortune, dismantle spiritual obstacles, and restore the flow of abundance to those who had lost their way. Chapter 2, A Sudden Silence in the Morning. The date was June 10th, the year 2012. The clock on the wall showed exactly 7:29 in the morning when the tranquility of the Arlington Emergency Dispatch Center was interrupted by a phone call. Chow Tran was on the line, his voice thick with apprehension. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that they had not answered their phone and that his teenage son, who had gone and knocked on their door, was met only with silence. The family had gathered outside the apartment, noting with growing dread that a window to the residence was slightly open. Officer Weller was the first to arrive on the scene. As a seasoned officer with 14 years of dedicated service, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere was unusual. It was far too early in the morning for a typical welfare check, and the sight of an entire extended family waiting anxiously on the pavement suggested that something was profoundly wrong. Step by step, Officer Weller approached the apartment. The door was unlocked. Upon entering, the interior presented a scene of disarray. It bore the classic hallmarks of a burglary. Drawers were pulled open, compact discs were scattered across the floor, and the living room furniture was in a state of upheaval. Officer Weller called out into the quiet apartment, his voice echoing off the walls. There was no response. He systematically checked the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom, finding them completely empty. Only the master bedroom remained. Inside the bedroom, the officer scanned the space with his flashlight. At first glance, the room appeared vacant, but as he turned to leave, the beam of his light caught a series of dark hand smudges on the wall adjacent to a remarkably small closet. A heavy silence filled the room. Officer Weller hesitated, a quiet instinct urging him to pause. Yet duty prevailed. He reached out, grasped the handle, and opened the closet door. There, bound together and hidden in the darkness of the small space, were Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been bound with silver duct tape, their heads wrapped completely. There were clear signs of blunt force trauma to their heads, likely inflicted by a heavy, metallic object. The shock of the discovery momentarily paralyzed the veteran officer. He walked out of the bedroom into the center of the living room, gathering his composure before finally speaking into his radio to summon a supervisor and the homicide unit. Chapter 3, The Puzzle of the Blue Bandana. Within the hour, the apartment was filled with forensic investigators and lead homicide detectives, including a veteran investigator with 21 years of experience in solving the city's most complex cases. Even for a seasoned detective, the sheer cruelty of the scene was difficult to comprehend. Long and Hong were gentle, hard-working souls who had spent their lives contributing to the community. They had no known enemies. On the coffee table in the living room, investigators discovered a curious collection of items. There was a plate containing crushed prescription medication, a discarded marijuana cigarette, and most notably, a light blue bandana wrapped carefully around an empty beer bottle. To the untrained eye, these items pointed directly toward a tragic burglary committed by a local street gang. Arlington was home to several active youth gangs known to use specific colors, including light blue, to mark their presence. Yet, the lead detective remained deeply skeptical. In his decades of investigating crimes, he had learned that sometimes a scene can appear too perfect. The placement of the bandana and the drug paraphernalia felt less like a chaotic robbery and more like a carefully staged performance designed to mislead the police. As a forensic team meticulously gathered hair fibers, latent fingerprints, and genetic material from the marijuana cigarette, the detectives turned their attention to the family. Chow Tran, acting as the primary spokesperson due to his strong command of the English language,